Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing a Dark World deck profiles. I'm really excited you guys because this deck is a really fun deck to be able to play with because of all the insane effects of your monsters when they get discarded to the graveyard. I have some really interesting decks in this build for you guys, so I am super excited to show you guys what we're playing in this deck. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, like getting your name description in every single video, getting a signed card to the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month to your patron, along with test stands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Grapha, Dragon Lord of Dark World. This is an insanely powerful boss monster for the deck because it has the ability that you can special summon this card from your graveyard by returning any Dark Lord that you control to your hand except another copy of itself. It also has the ability, if this card is discarded to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target one card your opponent controls and destroy that target. Then, if this card was discarded from the hand to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can look at one random card in your opponent's hand, and then if it's a monster, you special summon it to your side of the field, which is a pretty good effect to be able to just get a card out of your opponent's hand while also being able to get this card into the graveyard. It's a really good card for this deck. We then play 2 copies of Lucent Netherlord of the Dark World. This card is a really neat 2-of because it has the ability that if this card is discarded to the graveyard, you just special summon it back to your side of the field. Then if this card was discarded to the graveyard from your hand to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon a fiend monster from your deck to either player's field, which is a pretty decent effect to be able to special summon out a copy of Grapha to your side of the field with this card's effect. We then play 3 copies of Snow Unlight of the Dark World. If this card is discarded to the graveyard by your card effect, then you get the ability to add a Dark World card from your deck to your hand, which is a really good effect to be able to just immediately get the card that you need from your deck to your hand. We then play 3 copies of Brow Huntsman of Dark World. If this card is discarded to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. This card comes in very handy with cards like your Dark World Dealings, because if you do discard this card to the graveyard off of Dealings, it basically turns in a discard 1 into a draw 2, which is a really good effect for this card to be able to combo with. We then play 2 copies of Beige Vanguard of Dark World. This card is a really neat card because if this card is discarded to the graveyard, you can special summon this card back to your side of the field, which is a pretty good effect, especially since you can then return this card to your hand and special summon out your copy of Grapha. We then play 3 copies of Tour Guide of the Underworld. This card works very well in the deck to be able to go into some interesting link plays in the deck and even go into some XZs, which is really helpful for the deck. This card, when it's normal summoned, you could special summon a level 3 monster from your hand or deck, but it negates its effects, which is a pretty good effect because we have some interesting tech cards that we're actually special summoning off this card's effect, one of which being our copies of our Dark Spirit of Banishment. This card is a really neat card because it has the ability that if your opponent's monster attacks, at the start of the damage step, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard and then target a level 8 fiend monster in your graveyard and special summon it, but its effects are negated. And if you do, change the attack target to that monster and perform damage calculation. And if a level 8 fiend monster is sent to the graveyard while this card's in the grave, then you can add this card back to your hand. This card combos very well with our copy of Grapha to be able to just immediately get that card back out of the graveyard, and it's a really good card to summon off your copies of your tour guide. We then play a single copy of Dark Spirit of Malice. Dark Spirit of Malice is very similar to Banishment, but it has the ability that when your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard and then target a level 8 fiend monster in the grave and special summon it to your side of the field, but its effects are negated. And if a level 8 fiend monster is sent to the graveyard while this card is in your grave, then you can add this card back to your hand, which is a really good effect to be able to basically add both of these cards back to your hand if a level 8 fiend is sent to the graveyard. And it's a really insane effect that you can basically just constantly be summoning out your copies of Grapha from the grave. Now, another card you can actually summon out with these cards is your 1 copy of Cursed Necrofear. This card is an insanely powerful card in this deck and super easy to summon off your copy of your Dark Spirits, and it has the ability that it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special by its an effect, and it has the ability that you can target 3 of your banished fiend monsters and special summon this card from your hand. And if you do, shuffle all 3 of those banished fiend monsters into the deck. And then during the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was destroyed in your monster zone by an opponent's card and sent to the graveyard this turn, special summon this card from your graveyard and then destroy cards your opponent controls up to the number of face-up spells and traps that you control with different names. And you can only use the effect of this card once per turn. It's a really good card to be able to summon in the deck, especially with cards like Allure of Darkness, banishing your fiend monsters, and your copies of of your Gates of the Dark World, banishing your Fiend monsters, to be able to get this card back and be able to summon out your copy of your Dark Necrofear while also getting your Fiends back into the deck. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Upstart Goblin. Upstart Goblin makes it a 39 card deck, which is a really good thing for this deck to be able to just draw into your combo pieces. We then play a single copy of Monster Reborn, so we can bring back our copies of our Grapha back to our side of the field, or any of our Dark World monsters to then bounce them to our hand and summon out Grapha from the graveyard is a really good thing for this deck to be able to do, because then you get a monster in the hand and you get a boss monster on the field. We then play a single copy of Charge into a Dark World. This card is a neat Monster Reborn-ish effect. That is the ability that you get to target a level 4 or lower Fiend monster in the graveyard, special summon it, and then discard a Fiend monster, which is pretty good to be able to discard any Fiend monster that you want from your hand to the graveyard, so you can basically bring back a level 4 monster, and then you can bounce it back to the hand to get a copy of Grapha back from the grave. We then play a single copy of Card Destruction. Card Destruction is absolutely insane in this deck. Both players discard their entire hands and then draw the same amount of cards that they discard. This card is nuts in this deck, and I absolutely love it. You're basically, when you draw this card, you're usually going to win. We then play 3 copies of Drag Down into the Grave. Drag Down into the Grave is a neat card for this deck because it lets both players look at the opponent's hands and then pick a card from each other's hands and discard it to the graveyard, and then both players draw a card. This card's really good because it can give us knowledge of what our opponent is playing and what they currently have in their hand, while also being able to get a card out of their hand that we may not want them to keep, like a combo piece. We then play 3 copies of Dark World Dealing. Dark World Dealing lets both players draw a card and then discard a card. It comes in very handy with our copy of Beige, Brow, or Snow to be able to get a search, a special summon, or an extra draw off this card. It's a really good card and it helps us extend our plays. We then play 2 copies of Trade In because we are playing 4 level 8s in the deck. So this card is very good in the deck to be able to discard our copy of our Cursed Necrofear or Grapha to get it into the graveyard to be able to bring it back. We then play 3 copies of Allure of Darkness because everything we're playing is dark in the deck, so it's really good to be able to draw 2, and with cards like Cursed Necrofear, we can just immediately bring those cards back into the deck and summon out a big boss monster. We then play 3 copies of the Gates of Dark World. This card is a very interesting card that has the ability that all Fiend monsters gain 300 attack and defense, and then once per turn, you can banish a Fiend monster from your graveyard, discard a Fiend monster from your hand, and then you draw a card. This card is very neat because it does constantly give you that draw, which is really, really nice for this deck, while also giving your Fiend monsters a 300 point boost. We then play for the traps, because that's it for the spells. We're going to be playing 3 absolutely insane traps in this deck, which is going to be 3 copies of Skill Drain. This card is absolutely nuts. I'm so glad this card came back to 3 for this deck, and it is super, super insane. Basically, you activate this card, pay 1,000 life points, and then the effects of all face-up monsters on the field are negated. This card is crazy good. It's really fun to be able to flip in this deck because you don't use any monster effects on the field of any of your Dark World monsters, and you essentially turn it into Grapha Turbo, where you're going to summon out 3 copies of Grapha to your side of the field at 3,000 apiece with your copy of Gates on the field, and then just go in for game. This card is insane in this deck, and I'm so glad it's back at 3. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing a single copy of number 97. Number 97 is really neat because you can detach a material from this card. And then once you detach a material from this card, you can special summon out 2 dragon number monsters, which is going to be a copy of number 38 and number 100, and then attach one to the other one. So basically, you can either get 2 effects with this. You can either get a spell negation by summoning them like this, or you can get a 9,000 attack point monster by summoning it like this, because the copy of number 100 will go up by the amount of ranks on the field, which will be 9 on summon, which is pretty good for this deck, and it's very easy to make with your copy of Cursed Necrofear and your copy of Grapha being level 8s. We then play a single copy of Lancelot, Dark Knight of Underworld, which is number 23. This card is really good because it has the ability to can attack your opponent directly, being able to close out games. And when this card inflicts damage to your opponent, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls and destroy it. This card is really good as a one-up in here because it's very easy to summon to your side of the field. It also has the ability that once per turn, during either player's turn, when a spell or trap card or another monster effect is activated, you can detach a material from this card and negate the activation, which is a pretty good effect to be able to just give you a walking negate as well. We then play a single copy of number 22. This card is insane under your copy of Skill Drain because it turns into basically a 4,500 attack point monster. It's really easy to summon in the deck and can totally catch your opponent off guard. We then play a single copy of number number 30, Acid Golem of Destruction. This card is basically here because you're going to be using this card with your copy of Skill Drain to be able to summon to your side of the field as a 3,000 attack point monster. You don't summon this card unless you have Skill Drain, because it has the ability that during your standby phases you detach a material from this card or you take 2,000 points of damage, and you can't special summon any monsters while this card has no XZ materials. It can't attack. So basically, don't summon this card unless you have Skill Drain, because if you do, you're not going to have a great time. But it's a really good thing to be able to summon this card in the deck because you can make your copy of AA Zeus using this card. We then play a second copy of Levenair the Sea Dragon. This card is really good because you can detach your material from this card and then bring back one of your Fiend monsters that's banished, so it's really helpful in the deck. One copy of AA Zeus just in case you need to wipe the board. This card is really good in the deck, and I really like it as a one of in here. I don't really play Downward Magician in this deck because I usually don't end up needing the double Zeus wipe, but you can play it in the deck if you want to for one of the other Link monsters that we'll get into in a minute. We're then playing a single copy of Borrelsword Dragon. Borrelsword Dragon helps out a lot to be able to just go in for game, and it's a really amazing card for this deck. One copy of Access Code Talker to give us additional pops. One copy of Unicorn to spin stuff. IP Masquerade because we can go into the copy of Unicorn during the opponent's turn. Phoenix to pop spells and traps. Cerberus to pop monsters. And Wee Witch's Apprentice to boost up our Fiend monsters by 500 attack and defense, which is pretty good to be able to use in this deck. Now, you can drop the Wee Witch's Apprentice if you want to for the Downer Magician. That is something that I did consider doing in this particular build, but I ended up just keeping the Wee Witch because I ended up really liking that 500 attack point boost. And this card is the card that I would drop if I was going to consider dropping anything for the copy of Downer Magician to give the Zeus an additional pop on the field, which is really good. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to play with. I highly recommend if you've not played with Dark Worlds before, you definitely should, because it's a super fun deck to be able to play with. It's relatively budget to actually pick up Dark Worlds because the majority of the stuff has been reprinted multiple times, and it's super crazy good. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell next so you can come part of notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.